In the name of our Creator, Redeemer, and Sustainer. Amen. As we've noted before, this is an election year. And about once a month, we're going to be just talking about some of the issues that come up in this sort of very fraught, polarized time that we live in around culture and faith and politics and society and economics and polarization. And we want to engage these things as people of God and try to understand, like, how do we do this? How do we live and get along with one another? If I asked you to reflect on this phrase, clever as a snake, what comes to mind? Huh? Politics? Clever as a snake. Garden of Eden, where the snake was clever, sly, sneaky. Yeah. What about this phrase? Innocent as a dove. Baby Jesus? Baby Jesus? Huh? Oh, a baby? Innocence, purity, harmless. So why do you think Jesus puts these two things together? He's sending his followers out to proclaim the good news of the arrival of God's kingdom, and he warns them that their message will not always be well received. That the world is a dangerous place. You're being sent out like lambs among wolves. And so I guess that's part of it. If you're being sent out as a lamb among wolves, you better be smart and clever as a snake. You better have a good head on your shoulders, right? I don't know if you know much about comedians. You follow many comedians or something like that. I don't know if you ever noticed this, but not many of them were linebackers in high school. They were usually the ones being bullied, right? And how do you get out of being bullied if you're not very strong? You better be clever as a snake. You better be funny. You better be able to disarm people, right? But he also says that they must be innocent, right? That, well, to me, that means that the sheep should not become a wolf. For one thing. You need to be clever, insightful, wise, but wise enough to not become a wolf, because the temptation for one who is wise and clever is to become a wolf, to start using that power to become a predator, to take down the prey. Because the situation that the disciples are going into is very much about embracing a certain vulnerability. He does not send them out saying, everything will be okay. Everyone will welcome you with open arms. He's saying everything will definitely not be okay. But to know that when things do go wrong, that God is still with you, God is by your side. When you're maligned, when people take you out of context, when people accuse you of things, God will still be with you as long as you're still being a lamb and not becoming a wolf. And this text comes to mind as we're talking through these Sundays, because, again, we're in an election year. And we hear how much is riding on this election and how important it is that we vote the right way, that we think the right way, that we believe the right way, and how fraught and dangerous everything is supposed to be. Because very often, as we engage with the people in our lives, the temptation can be to either be a lamb or a wolf, to fight or to run, to attack or to freeze. And I'm hearing Jesus remind us to be wise, and how wisdom might be present in our interactions with people, specifically, I think, our family, our friends, like the people we actually care about. Because most of the way that we engage with these political issues aren't engaging with people. We don't see people engaging with others with whom they are in relationship with, right? We hear people arguing like they're in court, trying to persuade a bunch of people that they don't know to agree with them, right? This is the media landscape we live in, right? People are arguing, sometimes they're yelling at each other or trying to yell over each other, and what do they talk in? Sound bites, gotchas, slogans, trying to trip people up with a pithy saying, getting them back on their heels, kind of trying to get them speechless, trying to get them stuck where they don't know how to respond. I mean, I've done that before. It can be really satisfying. And there is an aspect of like friendly debating with people, among friends or people that you're, comfortable with, and kind of competitively, kind of going at it a little bit, sharpening that instrument of your mind, hoping to learn a little bit. But sometimes it's a lot of fun to be a wolf. But just being a wolf, winning in the long run, no one wins those kinds of arguments. Not really. We get drawn in when we see other people doing this. And we run across this when someone's presenting their own argument or analysis, even when they don't have someone to, respond to. Right? And we have to be wise. There is such a thing as propaganda. Heard of propaganda before? Clever serpents need to be aware of this. Let me tell you, any movie or TV show or book that is in the top 10 or won an Oscar or something is just a recapitulation of the status quo. Otherwise, it would not be as popular as it is, because everyone agrees with it and everybody likes it. There's nothing subversive or revealing about that. There are all kinds of ways we need to be clever, we need to be wary of, we need to pay attention to what's going on in the conversations we're having. The old trick of trying to get someone into a yes or no situation. Everybody just ask you a question, just say yes or no, yes or no. I saw someone very famously doing that. Yes or no, yes or no. Right? The old trick, right? Like, are you still beating your children? Yes or no? Yes or no? Are you still beating your children? Right? Yeah, be careful about those. The ad hominem attack. I love this. It's very clever, but it's a terrible argument. Right here, over and over again. You attack not the person you don't attack the argument, you attack the person who's arguing. Anytime you hear someone say, well, consider the source, that's an ad hominem attack. Or dismisses an idea because of who said it. My favorite ad hominem attack is this. Like vegetarians, those really sort of like uppity, high and mighty, moralistic vegetarians. You know who was a vegetarian? Hitler. Hitler was a vegetarian. Look it up. So I don't know if you want to be like Hitler and be a vegetarian, but that's on you. Another one you hear a lot, the genetic fallacy. I don't know why I'm hearing this more often. That something that starts as one thing must remain as always that thing. It never becomes a different thing. It's often used by people who think they're quoting a little piece of historical trivia to make their argument, which usually the bit of historical trivia is just as wrong as the argument is. For instance, that Christians shouldn't have Christmas trees because it was an ancient pagan practice. Not true. Or that police were invented to catch runaway slaves. Also not true. But can a Christmas tree become something other than that? Can a police force become something other than that? Right? There's this attempt that, because something had a particular start, a particular genesis, that it remains the same thing always. So you're still a baby, and gay just means people who like to go to parties a lot. Doesn't work. Another thing, this is a version of the tu quoque argument. You're going to hear it more and more and more and more. It's whataboutisms. I've probably mentioned whataboutisms before. It's basically, what about all the terrible things that the other side does? We learn this when we're very, very young, right? You punched your brother. Well, what about him? He punched me yesterday, right? It's an attempt to argue that something is unfair, that you're right and wrong, when really you're just sort of dismissing your own weaker position by trying to distract away from it, right? Republicans are monsters. Well, what about all the terrible things that Democrats do? Right? Often it's just an attempt at justifying something you or someone else is doing, right? I punched him because he stole my toy. Well, I stole his toy because he broke mine. Well, I broke his toy because he called me ugly, right? Well, what about this? Well, what about that? Well, what about the other thing? And just, when it comes to whataboutisms, we are fallible human beings, right? We do react to things that are done. And that is very understandable sometimes. You steal my toy, I might punch you. I understand that. But just because something is understandable doesn't make it justifiable. Just because something is understandable, I understand why someone would do that, doesn't mean that it's justifiable. And there are a lot of things that are justifiable from a legal standpoint that are not justifiable from a Jesus standpoint. And we are called to follow Jesus. Clever as serpents, innocent of doves. One more thing, because this just is one of those things that gets people twisted up. Cecily talked last week about symbols and how important symbols are. And if you missed that sermon, you should go watch it on YouTube. Because they inform very much about who we are, what we believe, what our values might be, right? What our beliefs are, what we care about and how, and what these things sort of mean, right? But it also can be kind of fraught, right? I mean, what does this symbol mean? Like, what does it mean? I was going to a church in Portland on 9/11, and there's a group of people who said, we should drape, we should have a flag in our sanctuary. We didn't have a flag in our sanctuary for lots of different reasons. For one thing, we're a church, we're not the state, we don't represent the state or the United States in any way or anything like that. But people wanted to put a flag in the sanctuary because a lot of people were flying flags as a sign of solidarity for the people who had died on 9/11, for the people who were in that plane who fought against the hijackers, ended up crashing, all the sort of horrible things that happened. And the response was, well, when people look at that flag, a lot of people think of, Vietnam. They think of all the injustices that the United States has been involved in over the years. And it sort of struck me was, well, what does this symbol mean? And who gets to decide what the symbol means? And I don't know the answer to that question. But people often are convinced that they know what this symbol means, and they will tell you what they think it means. And if you have a different sense of what that symbol means, you might get into a little tussle over that. And it's not just symbols. There are words these days that are contested. Words, phrases whose meanings are not always interpreted in good faith. Words that some people call dog whistles. Both sides do this. Well, they said this, but we all know what they really meant was this. The left accuses the right of doing this all the time. The right, they don't call it a dog whistle, but they just interpret it in the most outrageous bad faith way that they possibly can. And these words are flashpoints, right? Racism, socialist, sexism, white supremacy, both sides, systemic, death tax, Black Lives Matter, Blue Lives Matter, all lives matter, my body, my choice, from the river to the sea. I don't assume that I know what people mean when they say those words. And I don't know who gets to decide what those words or phrases mean. Usually people using them are using them in the way that they heard it in whatever sort of social or media bubble that they live in. And I don't assume that I know what that bubble is or what's in their heads, because they are not saying something often that they came up with. They're repeating a slogan that resonated with them for whatever reason. And I don't know what that reason is. And that leads me to, and I've kind of said this before, and maybe you're wiser than me, I don't know, but the best advice that I can give you to remain an innocent dove and be wise as a serpent is to listen. Listen, listen, listen. Listen long enough and hard enough to get below and beyond and behind the slogans and understand what the people that you love and care about. I'm not talking about the faceless, numberless infinity on the internet. The people that you know and love and care about, what they are really saying and what they are really meaning and why they may be saying it. Maybe listen so long that they can actually exhaust themselves enough to actually have a conversation with a real person, assuming that that's actually what they want to do in the first place. Because sometimes that is not what they want to do. Ask questions. Not passive-aggressive questions just to irritate them, which is a whole art in itself. Can you elaborate that? Explain that to me. I don't know if I understand what you're saying. Tell me more. Do you think a lot of other people agree with you? Do they share the same viewpoint? What is the value or the moral principle or the virtue, whatever, that gives rise to this idea? What is the roots of what you believe? Where does this come out of? Listen and understand, because you can't persuade someone of anything if you don't understand where they're coming from. You just can't. And you certainly can't do it if they don't understand where they're coming from. And they don't understand their own thoughts, which happens just as much. And sometimes, when it comes to friends and family, people that you care about, you can also just let it be. You don't have to poke the bear, even if the bear is trying to poke you. Right? Sometimes, too, to switch metaphors, people have a bee in their bonnet about something. And sometimes it's good to just let people vent. I've had some very contentious conversations with people when we both agreed on a point, but they just really felt like they needed to argue the point. And it felt like I was in an argument, even though we both agreed. And I was like, what is going on? It feels like we're having an argument. What is happening? And it's like what they really want you to do is to be emotionally invested in that moment in what they are emotionally invested in. You don't have to do that. But maybe it's good to say, why are we arguing about this? It feels like I'm in an argument, Again, I'm not saying to be aloof or to be disengaged or to be thoughtful or just to nod your head and be a doormat for whatever someone is saying or whatever someone needs to unload about. The kingdom of God has a vision, a dream for human well-being and flourishing, where all are fed and all are healed and all are given new life. This is where all of our beliefs and understandings, interpretations of the world should flow out of. Most people, I think, feel in their gut this very thing, even if they can't articulate it. And I would hope that as we share our life with others, as we connect in relationship with people who are different, with different backgrounds and experiences, that we can stir up that same desire for God's kingdom in others. A desire for justice, for peace, for compassion, for dignity, for joy and happiness. And sometimes what it takes to experience that kingdom and its presence is a genuine friend who can listen. Who can listen and inquire and consider, and with love, to challenge. That can be hard work and difficult when we bring our own things into our conversations and our relationships. We bring our own fallible selves into something. That's why we need to heed these words of Jesus, to be wise as serpents and innocent as doves. Amen.